Welcome back, everyone, to this, the 14th episode of Blue Collar, White Collar. I'm not going to remember which number it is for all time. Anyway, let you guys all know what's going on right now. Nicholas is currently suffering from a power outage, so he's being lit by candle at the moment. Hopefully that's not too bothersome for our 3 viewers.
First of all, pretty cool that we've reached enough episodes that we're starting to lose track of the number.
No, I just have a terrible memory.
No, but like if it's 5 or 6, it's like, okay, we don't really know what, but you do know what number it is, whereas 14, 15, 16, it all kind of starts to blur together.
Yes.
But I did lose power, so I hope everyone can see me okay. But happy to be here, and I'm wearing, but
still wearing it
because I got the gift that Kieran got me on our last episode. We are going, because I was allowed to choose our topic for today, and it's something that I've been reflecting on a lot recently, and we talked about it a little bit on the podcast last month. But I wanted to talk about fascism. I asked the question last month, is democracy failing? And we had a good discussion about that. But I don't think we talked enough about what happens when democracies fail, and how it's not something that happens in an instant, that it happens over time. And I think that what we're seeing right now in Western society is the kind of weakening of democratic institutions and the creeping in of fascism to replace it. Kieran has a bit of a different perspective, and we are excited to talk about that. But the theme is going to be fascism, or maybe more broadly, authoritarianism. So Kieran, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, sure. So basically, you had asked me if I thought that fascism was spreading across the West. And my only disagreement was that I don't agree that it is fascism. I think it is a more either undefined or generic version of authoritarianism. And so that's really where I'm going to be arguing with you from, is not that I don't see the rise of authoritarian beliefs, just not specifically that it is fascism, because that is a specific type of authoritarianism that I do see in certain places in the West, but not broadly across the West.
Interesting. Okay, well, let's discuss. To give everyone kind of where we are in time, the most recent news, the kind of big thing that happened, well, I guess it's been about a week now, was the assassination of Charlie Kirk in the United States, in Utah. And the blowback that we've seen in response to his death. And, very, very recently, Jimmy Kimmel got pulled from his ABC network for comments that he made about Charlie Kirk. So that's where we are in this moment. But I think, and obviously when I talk about fascism, I'm thinking about Trump, but I'm not just thinking about Trump. I'm thinking about examples in Europe, and I'm thinking about the weakening of our own democracy here in Canada. And so I kind of wanted to talk about some of the things that we're seeing right here at home that I worry are, frightening trends. Kieran, maybe I can start by asking you, how do you understand fascism, if you had to define it?
Well, to me, fascism, it starts out with authoritarianism. You have one guy at the top who's making decisions. He has a team of advisors, generals, or whoever it may be. This person at the top has to be charismatic, and they have to lead the country by inspiring them into a revolution from an upheaval from these times have been hard, but we will be great again. Does that sound familiar? Also, in terms of economics, fascists actually, in many ways, are capitalistic, but they are state-driven, where if you don't do the bidding of the state as your, private industry, then they will shut you down and they will replace you with someone who will. So it's not like communism in that it's a complete state takeover. Grocery stores, I'm sure, were still ran by people who own their own businesses in Nazi Germany. One of the things that is a common trait in fascism is secret police, but you see that in a lot of authoritarian systems. One of the things that fascist dictators often do is they hold large amounts of rallies in order to propagandize their population. So I can see why people would be noticing that in the current president of the United States, because many things that he does line up with the traits of a fascistic leader. Other than that, many different aspects of fascism, to me, seem to just line up with generic authoritarianism.
Interesting.
A lot of it comes down to the leader.
Yeah.
A lot of it comes down to having a leader that is willing to drive the people.
Absolutely.
Because a lot of authoritarian systems kind of depress the population, but fascistic regimes, they kind of get them riled up and ready to be better, to take on the world.
Well, you're right that it historically emerges, and if we're talking about Nazi Germany, it emerges out of a democracy, right, where this strongman leader has the support of a significant portion of the population, right? A population who feels that the system in its current form has failed them, and that they're looking for a quote unquote savior, right? And the strongman at the top says, I and only I can fix your problems. And it very often comes down to attacking a group that is being accused of being responsible for the kind of descending quality of life of the people, right?
Scapegoating, absolutely.
Exactly. So obviously with Hitler, Jews were the primary target, although there were others. With Trump, it's immigrants. Although, I'm obviously not suggesting that Trump has launched a campaign of mass murder in the way that Hitler did. Although he is launching this effort to deport them, right? And what has happened now in the United States is that we are not just seeing ICE agents, official ICE agents, who are, following certain procedures and removing illegal immigrants out of the country. We are now seeing people in masks who are essentially vigilantes, right, with no identification, who are throwing people into trucks, like pulling them off the street because they are Black or brown or of a visible minority, and they are disappearing them, right? That is wild.
Yeah,
that is wild.
This is why police have to identify themselves whenever they're detaining a person, is because if you're able to just wear a black costume and just kidnap people, how do people know that you're not just being kidnapped? So I understand.
But that's it, right? And the concentration of power is such that when the guy at the top is condoning that kind of behavior, what mechanism do you have to stop them?
Well,
what mechanism do you have?
You're supposed to have different branches. The United States is supposed to have
different branches of government, except we basically don't. We basically don't in the United States, right? Congress is.
It's them, luckily for us.
Yes.
So in the case where I will agree with you, where it seems like, and this is a change of perspective from what I've previously said, the one place in the West that I will agree with you, that I see fascistic behaviors and tendencies, not necessarily beliefs from the bottom up, but from the government itself, is the United States. But you had asked the question, the West, and none of the other countries that I have seen in the West that are tending towards authoritarian beliefs, in my opinion, get to the point where it's fascistic, because a lot of it comes down to the leader. None of these places have a charismatic leader who will, like, Nigel Farage is not going to lead an uprising and a revolution in the UK. He doesn't have the charisma to do that. He's a great politician, whether you agree with him or not. He's really good at what he does, but he's not charismatic enough to do that. And the leader of Italy, what's her name?
Meloni.
Yes, she does not have the charisma to be able to lead Italy in that way. Interestingly enough, because Italy is actually the country where fascism originated from, with Mussolini. I don't even know who the person in France would be, but like the.
So let's now kind of expand this discussion, because I think that you and I agree that what we're seeing in the United States is a shift towards fascism.
Oh, and
right?
definitely not Polyev. He does not have the charisma to be the leader that revolutionizes the country.
But I think the point that I'm trying to make, and the one that I want to really spend this episode discussing, is whether Western countries, whether they have a fascist leader right now or not, whether they are becoming more and more ripe for a fascist takeover, right? And I think that the United States got to that point where it felt as though life was just too hard, or the system was too rigged against people, that they voted for Trump twice, right? And in the second term, especially, right, it is very different from the first term. He is unleashed in the way that he was not in the first term. I actually don't even know that I'd call him a fascist. Trump 1.0, was that presidency fascistic? I think Trump would have liked it to be, but he was held back by the kind of traditional establishment Republican Party, right? Whereas now he has taken complete control of the Republican Party. There are no longer any what's the word I'm looking for? Like roadblocks or people in his way. He has complete power, right? He has Congress, both chambers of commerce. He has the Supreme Court 6-3, and he doesn't have anyone in his cabinet who is going to say no to him, right? Like, he basically has absolute power. You can argue that the markets are maybe a check on his power, but that's pretty much it. So yeah, let's now kind of expand it to the rest of the West. Let's talk about Canada. Let's talk about the countries in Europe. I think that the trend in America is the same as the trend in Canada and in Europe, and just we haven't gotten there yet, but that we're heading in that direction, and that maybe it's not Polyev. You're right. I think he's toast, but I think that we might reach a point in 10, 15 years where someone who is more skilled than Polyev, who is able to really rile up and tap into the anger that Canadians are feeling at an unfair economy, right? A rigged economy in which people who are working hard can no longer survive in the way they used to be able to. I think that there is a future, a near future, where we could have a fascist leader emerge. Look at what's happening in France, right? Who is second after Macron? Who is the next most popular leader? It's Marine Le Pen, right?
Sorry, but she's the leader of the. I'm sorry, I'm just going to completely disagree with you on that one.
She absolutely is.
No, I completely disagree with you.
Okay, why?
Because she's basically just a fairly right-leaning character. Like, she's not this insane nut job who's going to take over the country and flip all of France into a dictatorship. Like she doesn't have the power. She does. It's not. She's just not the person to do it. I'm sorry. Like it's absurd.
But you don't. But you don't think like that there's a world in which France, something happens in France. There's a recession, or there's some kind of huge political turmoil that happens in France. People get really upset. Like, look at the Gilets jaunes, where people were just incredibly upset about working conditions, and they started like rioting in the streets, right? That is a very tangible anger, right? Fascism emerges from anger, and I think the more angry a population becomes, the more easy it is for a fascist leader to emerge, right?
I don't
So
disagree.
maybe it's not Marine Le Pen. Maybe you're right. Maybe she doesn't have the charisma. But could someone else take over her party, bring it further to the right, and be elected as their president and do things similar to what Trump is doing? I think it's very possible.
But here's
Look
the
at what's
thing.
happening in the UK, right? Like Brexit was an expression of anger. And
Absolutely.
you're right. Right now they have Keir Starmer, who's the most vanilla prime minister ever. But does that mean that the people are not upset that their rent is crazy high, their food prices are crazy high, their public systems, whether it be education or healthcare, are not serving them in the way that they used to? Yes, those things are becoming more and more true, right? And it's like it is becoming, the conditions are becoming more and more such that a fascist leader has the opportunity to emerge.
Okay, you're entirely correct that is possible. But at this point, if you're talking the timescales that you've mentioned, where 20 years from now, think how much changes in 20 years. George W. Bush was the president 20 years ago. The world was in a completely different state. So in 20 years, yeah, 100%, yeah, you could be right. But what I see in France and in the UK and in Germany is that people that are pissed off, and in many cases they're pissed off for valid reasons. And what ends up happening is when they express their discontent with the situation, whether that be the economy, as you've mentioned, or the fact that each of these countries has imported millions of people who are of a vastly different culture, where there is, let's just say, some friction, and they're upset about that, and they're upset that their countries aren't doing anything about it. And what ends up happening is that the country then uses the might of their military and their police to shut this shit down. And that is the authoritarian system that I see already in place in these countries, that all they need is a few good reasons. All you need is a few violent acts to take power here and there. Just look at what the United States is doing with Charlie Kirk right now. Perfect example. Look at what Pam Bondi said. She started talking about free speech and hate speech, and we can't be letting people have hate speech. 5 years ago, they were bitching and complaining that lefties were using those same words. So governments using, whether it's a false flag operation or a legitimate event to gain more power, a la 9/11 and the Patriot Act, that's the direction that I see the authoritarian system going. Not towards fascism, but towards, I don't even know what you would call it, because I don't think there is a word for the type of system that currently is operating there. It's like a democratic authoritarianism, because these people are being elected, but then they're also influencing and manipulating people and crushing people and ruining other people's lives for no good reason.
Until there are no more elections, right? Until Trump, until Trump seizes power over the very process by which presidents and elected officials are chosen, right? Like, I am very worried about 2028, right? Not just because I think it's very possible that Trump runs again. I also think that there is, whether some fantastic leader emerges for the Democratic Party, I am like genuinely concerned now that Trump has seized that Trump by that point will have seized power over the voting process, right? And made it so that there are no more free and fair elections, right? And would he hand over power? Like, the whole point of militarizing DC is that he is going to hold that power, right? And
he will hand over power when his puppet is elected. That is one situation where I'll say he will hand over power when his puppet is elected. Someone who will come to him for not every decision, but every important decision.
I'm not sure. I wanted to ask you about Israel.
Okay. What did you want to ask? Because I actually think this is a very interesting place to go.
Yeah. Netanyahu remains prime minister of Israel. He has somehow managed to stave off all of the corruption charges laid against him. I think he's using the war in Gaza as a means of retaining power. His far right coalition is persecuting this genocide in Gaza. Is Israel still a free and fair democracy?
Here's the thing. Yes, but here's the thing. I think that something that people often make the mistake of, and I even used a word that is the opposite of it. I feel like people often make the mistake to think that democracy means a non-authoritarian system, or system where people have rights. Democratically, you could have your rights taken away from you. So it's just because you have a democracy does not mean you have a place where people are living in a fair system, in a system that is just. So I think that it's still a democratic country, but they are being ran by a person who is being democratically elected, but still doing horrible things. So yeah, they are a democracy. They're just kind of dickheads at it at the same time, and that's me being very generous with how nice I'm being. I'm calling them only dickheads.
Yeah, I was gonna say. Yeah, I don't know. I think like under extreme conditions, people are willing to hand over power to strong men, yes. Right?
Or women.
So I haven't seen one yet.
A strong woman.
Not that we couldn't. A fascist female leader. I don't think we've seen one.
What about Georgia Maloney?
No, I agree. She's a far right politician. I don't know that I go so far as calling her a fascist.
I don't even know what that word means anymore. Far right. Some people, I've been described as far right. I've also been described as a communist, which is absurd.
Yeah. So okay, like for me, Israel is tending towards fascism. I think Benjamin Netanyahu may not have the same kind of power necessarily that Trump has when it comes to the support he has from his government, right? He still has he holds on to a shaky coalition that could collapse, right? But what did we see Netanyahu doing right before the war in Gaza started? Do you remember?
Yeah, he was trying to make it so that the judicial system had less power.
That's right. He was going after the Supreme Court because he didn't have the same support on the Supreme Court that Trump does, right? Having appointed 3 of them.
And Trump, I mean. To be more. Clarence Thomas, in my opinion, will probably resign before the end of this, before the end of the Trump term.
I at this point, we're done with, Republican or right-leaning judges retiring during Democratic presidencies and vice versa. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was the last to make that mistake. R.I.P. RBG. But what Netanyahu wants to do more than anything is retain power, right? I think that's pretty easy to say, and he will do anything to retain his power. I think of him as the Frank Underwood of Israel.
If you think about it, that's exactly why this war has gone on as long as it has. They could have done
That's
something
right.
much faster, much more lethal, and it could have been over a lot. It would have been horrible, and people would have been disturbed by it, but they still are. It's just it hasn't dragged out as long, or it has dragged out much longer than it could have.
I think it's hard to know what Israel will look like post-war, because at some point the war has to end, although you could argue it's not even really a war anymore.
I don't think it ever was.
It is just, well, yeah, like Hamas was a military force, and now they are not in nearly the same way as they were. But like the guise of war continues, right? And Israel continues to insist that Hamas is a threat and continues to use that as a reason to postpone. Oh,
we have
my power's back.
Okay, so I have a list here of some bullet points of things that are mostly fascistic and general authoritarian things. So I'm going to go over some of these, and we're going to see how it compares to Netanyahu. Ultranationalist.
Yes.
Forcible suppression of the opposition. Not yet.
Not yet.
Traditional values and gender roles. Not that that's a big major deal, but definitely.
No, I don't think that's true of Netanyahu.
Maybe not as much as other places, but definitely. I mean, it's a Jewish nation, right? So they definitely believe in certain gender roles. The myth of national decline and rebirth. I mean, all of Israel is a state in rebirth, so that's kind of interesting. In-group versus out-group. Scapegoating minorities, absolutely. With the Palestinians.
Well, yeah.
Fascist economic policies, often described as corporate. State controls what is produced, but private property is generally maintained. Seems to be. I don't know that much about the Israeli economy.
I'm not sure either.
It's fairly capitalistic. Propaganda and secret police, absolutely. Actively mobilizes and energizes the population. Look what's going on there now, absolutely. Militarism and violence as tools of political renewal. Definitely.
Yes.
Glorification of violence and war. Absolutely.
Yes.
Myth, tradition, and emotional appeal over rational debate.
I would say that's actually less that applies far more to Netanyahu than Trump.
What, glorification of violence and war? Absolutely.
Trump is not a wartime president. Let's be very clear, right? He is attacking the immigrant community by trying to deport as many as possible. But he has not started any new wars, right? In the way that Hitler obviously was the chancellor of Germany.
Just wait until they move in on
when
Venezuela.
The Second World War began. Sorry?
Just wait till they move in on Venezuela.
Well, they've been blowing up these drug cartel boats, but that's not the same thing.
Are they drug cartel boats? Is there any evidence that they're drug cartel boats?
Not really.
So,
haven't looked into it that much.
Yeah, but I have more on here, but I'm not going to go through all of them. But yeah, so I will give you that Netanyahu definitely many of his traits and ways of governing seem to line up with fascistic tendencies. So I'll give you that for sure. I have an interesting question for you.
Yeah.
This is
okay. I have a question for you too.
Not exactly related to what we were talking about, but it does.
I have one that's pretty.
Okay, you go first then. If it's related to, you go first.
I guess because we're talking about these different countries, United States, Israel, France, Italy, UK, and we're talking about how different countries have these different circumstances, right? Where what's happening in Israel is very different than what's happening in the United States, which is very different than what's happening in France, right?
Well,
But
I would argue
I
that
think
France, Germany, UK, and a few other of those countries are mostly suffering from the same things. But
yes, and that's in large part because their economies are intertwined. Um, Although, look at what the UK did with Brexit, right? Um, there is undoubtedly this kind of losing of faith in the system, right? We've kind of operated through our whole lives, and I think that our parents and grandparents too have kind of operated under this understanding that democracy is the best form of government, right? Winston Churchill has that great quote: democracy is the worst form of government except for every other kind, right? And we have kind of lived our lives, post World War II, but especially post Cold War, where it's like democracy is it, right? Democracy is where it's at. And we have the best system. Now, our democracies are also capitalist democracies, and they are very free market, they are
all the
neoliberal,
better
and
because of it.
and they are becoming oligarchical, I would argue, especially in the United States, where you have the concentration of power and wealth into these very few
Absolutely.
companies. They are modern day oligarchs. I would argue Zuckerberg and Musk.
Who was it that
These
gave
guys
Trump a
are
gold bar?
are oligarchs.
Who was it that gave Trump a gold bar?
I'm not sure. I didn't say that.
There's some billionaire. I'm pretty sure he just gave him.
I'm sure. But I think this trend is a trend, because democracy is proving to be weaker and less effective than we thought, or at least less sustainable. Right? We've had these systems for a long time, especially in the West, right, where we've had these systems. If we think about the post World War II era, the establishing of the UN, we've had these systems for a while now, right? Coming up on 100 years. And it almost feels as though they are reaching an expiry date, or at least the nature of our systems are no longer satisfactory to a majority of people, right? And that's why you get people voting for populist, fuck the system candidates like Trump. That is a theme that we can see everywhere, and it manifests in different ways, different leaders, different parties, different countries with different histories, and demographics will choose different leaders, but the trend is moving away from democracy. My question to you, Kieran Lentz, is if you don't agree that the trend is towards fascism, what would be the word you would use?
I think
Is it authoritarianism? Is that the word
well,
that you feel?
that's such a generic word for it. But I almost feel like
Yeah.
saying I said earlier. I think the right word for it might be it might be democratic authoritarianism, where you
It's
elect
kind of like a
just enough.
contradiction.
You get just enough of a coalition to govern, and then you amass enough power in your government, and then you just force people, and then you just make them do whatever laws you can impose on them. Um, so, yeah, I don't know if there is an actual word to describe what I think these countries, not the United
Mm.
States, because the United States was going in that direction, but Trump has steered it into a different kind of authoritarianism. The other strain of authoritarianism is still there, but it's lost so much steam because the Trump train kind of derailed it, right? It's like a multinational democratic authoritarianism. You have all these countries, like many NATO countries, and they're all going in many of the same ways, doing many of the same things that the populations aren't agreeing with. And it seems like, why aren't you guys listening to us? We're the ones who are voting you in, but then we vote you in and you don't do what we ask of you. You do what these global elites seem to think is for the better. And that's why people are turning against the democratic system. It's not because democracy is failing. It's because people feel like democracy is failing. They're not. How many elections have we had where the person who has the most votes doesn't win? And
you mean like popular vote?
Yeah. One of the reasons I think that this is also happening is because I think people are no longer. How do I put this? It's almost like you can have a multi-ethnic society, but you can't have a multicultural society. In that you could have people of all races, but there has to be a unifying culture. It doesn't have to be top down.
Predominant culture.
Rigid, but there has to be an umbrella that covers everything. And when you have people who have allegiances to other things that don't abide by the rules of that umbrella, you can't be part of society. I don't want hardcore Islamists coming into Canada. I don't think those ideals overlap. And I don't think that's an absurd thing to say. And there's other behaviors and other beliefs that I don't think fit into the Canadian ethos. And if you have enough, and it's not always giant disparities like this, but when even you have smaller, multiple disparities, it can make cracks in the foundations that you have the United States. Like, you look at the United States, and various pockets have such vastly different politics that you go across a border and you could be arrested and get life in jail for something that, John,
look at Quebec.
A free person.
We don't need to look down to the United States, right? Quebec is so different from the rest of the country, right? Like, we speak a different language.
Yeah, and in a certain way it works because, broadly Canadians had this Canadian ethos. And a lot of us see that is weakening, and some of it I think actually comes from the internet, because instead of having to relate to your neighbor, you can relate to your internet neighbor, and you can sort yourselves by the things that you like and the things that you believe, so you can get into a group of all anarchists or a giant group of libertarians and only talk to them and not your neighbors and not your fellow Canadians, because most of these people are going to be from more populated areas like the United States. We're a tenth of their size. So if you pick out a group of people, chances are you're going to be talking to an American, not a Canadian. So then you have to really adjust what you're talking about and the way your brain's thinking. And, I feel like Canada and the United States, I feel like all these places, they seem like they're falling apart because we don't have that unifying narrative anymore. We don't have something that makes Canadians all united. And we actually got that back for a little while, a couple months ago. Do you remember what that was? That thing that united Canadians almost entirely?
I do. Trump.
And it's fading away again.
51st state,
It didn't last because it was a house of straw, not a house of bricks. Anyway, thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Lol. I see a lot more people walking around with like Canada t-shirts and Canada hats and stuff. Like, I feel like it stuck around. I feel like it did give us a good kind of jolt of patriotism.
It's not lasting.
And I don't think, I don't know that that's true. I agree that it's a lot less strong because the fear of annexation is not really there anymore. I gotta be honest, I was never super like worried about it, in the sense that I don't think it was really on the table.
What, Canada falling apart?
Well, American annexation of Canada.
Oh, no.
Like, I don't really think that was on the table. But, our resources are very attractive to the United States. And I do think that there will be maybe slower encroachments for, trying to get our water, for example.
Or all of our awesome minerals.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I want to talk about Canada, because I think we disagree on this point pretty strongly.
I'm saving my question for later. I'll save it for the end. But
Oh, sorry.
no. It's
I
actually
would
better
love to
this
hear
way.
it now.
It's actually better this way. Go
Okay,
ahead.
well, I just want to talk about Canada,
Yeah,
and then we can
I do
close
too.
with your question.
I also want to talk about Canada because this is where we live.
This, this is where we live. Um, I think, well, I don't think I know that Canadians are becoming more and more frustrated,
Yes.
right? I think that um, if we look at cost of living, cost of housing, cost of food, um, the ability that our like the public services that are largely falling apart. I think in most of the country, like I, obviously live in Quebec, and we pay the highest taxes of any province or state in North America, and our healthcare system is complete shit. Our public education system falling apart. Our ability to access affordable housing dwindling. Um, that's worse in Ontario, in British Columbia, right? Housing is just absurdly expensive. And, the masses, the kind of the middle class, the shrinking middle class is becoming more and more frustrated, right? And I think Mark Carney came in on this idea of making our economy, retooling our economy to be one that is less dependent on the United States, right? Being able to economically repel these attacks, these tariff attacks from our southern neighbors.
Which I support.
Me too. But I don't think I think so. I think my point is that I think we dodged a bullet, and I heard a great analogy recently where someone said, we dodged a bullet with Pierre Polyev, but the gun is still loaded, right? The anger that was about to propel Pierre Polyev to the prime ministership is still there, even if Pierre Polyev's support is not. My question to you, and I'll kind of give my take on it afterwards, but my question to you is whether you think 10 years from now, 15 years from now, Canada, based on kind of where we are and where we're going as a trajectory, do you think a fascist leader could emerge in Canada?
Well, it's always possible. One thing I want to start out by saying is I know earlier you'd said that Polyev is done, and in many ways I think he is done, but I don't think I think he still has the potential to be our prime minister, but he does not have the gravitas that he would have had if he would have won in our most recent election. People would have been much more behind him. They would have been much more rah Polyev, and he would have been able to do a lot more. I think now if he does win, it'll probably be a one-term thing or something. I don't know. He doesn't have the support behind him as much, and I think he knows that, and he feels, especially like losing his own seat, what a slap in the face.
Yeah, what a slap in the face.
But is it possible that a fascistic leader comes to Canada, or I guess would emerge from within Canada? It's possible, but like with the European states, I'm far more worried about the internal authoritarianism that is already seeping and growing inside of our government. That to me, it's already present. It's something we need to address much more now than the potential of fascistic government taking over in 15 years. You have to be careful, though, because if you do it wrong, you will initiate that fascistic takeover in 10-15 years, right? You do it wrong, it backfires. You do it right, try and strip away some of the excess power that the government has overstepped in their boundaries and wean it back to a place that's reasonable. And you do that, I think Canada will stay in a safe place. But you do it wrong, or you don't do anything, there could be an uprising. Again, whether it's fascistic or not, yes, I could easily see authoritarianism being the main philosophical system in Canada if things go wrong. I mean, you see a lot of people who have communist ideas, or how many people were willing to rat on their neighbors during COVID times that they were going and visiting their family. That's fucking absurd. It goes to show that most people, they think in Nazi Germany, they would have helped Anne Frank, when in reality, most people would have turned that little girl in. It's disgusting. Yeah, no. Fascism in Canada, not really that's something that I'm worried about at the moment.
I disagree. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah, obviously.
I think more and more I think that Canadians have a different culture to that of the United States. I think we are more accepting of immigrant communities, as an example. I think that Canadians are there is a less distinct national identity that Canada has than the United States, or at least our national identity is the embracing of diversity much more than the United States, right? And much more than I would say European countries too, right? I think that Canada is a country that is more aware of its history, more aware that everyone in this country came here from somewhere else, aside from Indigenous people, obviously, that at some point all of our ancestors came here, right?
Even theirs, just a lot longer before.
Well, yeah, by that logic, everyone came from Africa at some point at the beginning of human history, but that's not what we're talking about. I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that I don't see necessarily this kind of like othering that is necessary to fascism, where we kind of have this group that we have identified as the problem, right? Hitler had the Jews, Trump has the immigrants. I don't know that there's necessarily a community that we could villainize in the same way, right? Do you want to say something to that?
It's just, look, I work on the floor of a steel shop. So I work with a lot of rough guys who don't care for all this stuff, and we work with some immigrants. But I can tell you there is much disdain for immigrants now in Canada that there wasn't when you and I were children. When you and I were children, our immigration system was so good that it made us love our immigrants. And now, the way that the Liberals have done it for however long since Justin Trudeau changed it, I don't exactly know. Things have changed, and people definitely have much more disdain for these people. It's not all of them. It's often the ones who they find maybe they don't work as hard, or they break the rules, or maybe there's some disdain because your company gets certain benefits for employing these people, and so they let them get away with stuff, and then there's favoritism, and that makes you hate them even more, even though that should make you hate your company, not the immigrant.
Yeah.
So I definitely see much disdain for immigrants. There's a few guys that I work with that are immigrants that people love, but because they're hardworking, good guys. And there's other guys that I work with who people have problems with that are immigrants because they've never actually bothered to try and learn how to speak their language. They speak a little bit, enough of it to get by, but when you've been in Canada for several years, you kind of expect people's English to improve. And when it doesn't, people get kind of annoyed at that. And it's not a race thing, because some of these people are European immigrants. I really hope people don't. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, no, I hear you, and I also don't want to say that we don't have a racism and or kind of immigrant like xenophobia.
Yeah, that's the word I would use.
It is absolutely present in Canada, as it is everywhere in the world, right? There is no country you will find where there is not a certain disdain for groups who are not considered the kind of native group. And I think, even though technically the native community would be the indigenous community, kind of white Anglo-Saxon is considered the traditional Canadian
I know
group. I don't know. You know what I mean?
Interestingly enough, it's Western countries that have the least xenophobia of all the countries in the world. We're the ones who are most accommodating to the foreigners.
Right, and yet to your point, we were more accommodating 20 years ago.
I mean, in some ways, we're too accommodating now.
Well, I would argue that that's actually not necessarily true. I would say that some people have shifted to a more kind of welcoming philosophy, whereas others have shifted to a more negative view of immigrants.
Sure. Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
Right, and we've just become more polarized in that sense.
But I think it's because of the policy and the way that people have been imported into this country at the rates that they have.
The reason that I say, and I kind of want to get back to this, and then I want to get to your question, but the reason that I say that the conditions in Canada for a fascistic leader to emerge are becoming more and more ripe is that the concentration of power, the concentration of wealth, is flowing to a very kind of small group of people and corporations, banks, oil companies, food distributors, phone providers, right? Like, I think that power is being concentrated more and more at the top. And I think that more and more, as we see the kind of vanishing of the middle class and more people falling actually down from being middle class, and their children, their grandchildren, who are actually enjoying a lower standard of living than their parents, which is something that is pretty new, right? Historically, we've kind of improved our quality of life, and now our quality of life is actually going the wrong way. That is because the middle class is disappearing. More and more people are falling into poverty. And I don't just mean homelessness, right? The people that you see on the streets. But I'm talking about people who are spending, 60% of their rent on, 60% of their income on rent. The rest on, essentials like food, diapers, clothing, electricity, transportation, right? Like basic things. They have no disposable income, and they're living below the poverty line, right? That is increasing. The amount of people who are using food banks is skyrocketing. The amount of demand for social housing, way above what we can actually meet, right? These are worrying trends in Canada. And I think that, like in the United States, like in a lot of European countries, our faith in our system is declining, which means that people like Pierre Poilievre, who emerge and say the system is broken, are becoming more and more likely to win, right? And Pierre Poilievre is not the worst version of what could happen, right? Trump is a much worse character who could emerge, someone who is Trump-esque, right? Or
worse,
something else.
Trump isn't even the worst version
right?
of this.
You're right. My point is just that I think that this concentration of wealth and power at the top, that is having an impact on the majority of people, is creating those conditions. And that I think we could see someone who emerges and says, the system is completely broken. I am going to just fucking change everything. And oftentimes that involves doing some terrible things. That could happen in my mind, and I'm worried about it.
Yeah, I mean, I see where you're coming from this. it comes down to the thing. I don't see that that's necessarily going to be fascism. I don't disagree, because what happens when you have one authoritarian system and it's failing people, generally people will turn for a different kind of authoritarian system. And the authoritarian system that I'm worried about, like I said, if it's not addressed correctly, will likely lead to the authoritarian system that you're worried about, although it might not necessarily be fascistic. One of the things that will make it ultranationalist when it does happen, if it does happen, is because the reaction is to what people see as a ultra-internationalist, a globalist governing style. As I said, people talk about going to Davos and all these world leaders that go and they make plans. So that's the reaction that people are having. Whether or not they're accurate or not, that doesn't matter. But it's not necessarily going to be fascism. But I agree it's going to be authoritarianism, because fascism is specific definitions. And it may be, but it also may not be. Another thing that does tend towards the possibility of it being fascism is the idea of rebirth and renewal. And if people feel like their country's failing them, that's an opportunity for rebirth, and renewal. So you definitely may be correct. I just see that it's not fascism, and that was the question you'd asked me. So mainly I'm being pedantic and just arguing semantics with you this entire podcast.
Pedantic and the semantic. You a rapper now or what?
Nope. I do not listen to rap music.
Before you pose your question, Kieran, would you like to tell everyone what's on the screen behind you?
Oh, that's the DVD menu for Star Trek First Contact, the best TNG movie that there is. I had it on in the background because I was watching it while Nick was getting ready, and I'm also wearing Star Trek sweater.
Nerd.
Yep, giant freaking nerd. That's what I am right here. That's why there's also Funko Pops behind me. Wrong side. I'm a giant loser.
Yeah.
So,
and your son, you've condemned your son to the same fate.
And I'm happy about it. He's actually way cooler and way more of a ladies' man than I ever was, so he's not going to have any problems.
Yeah. Well, thank goodness.
Anyway, so my question to you is more of an it's not necessarily about authoritarianism, but I'm going to start out by explaining where I see this happening from. So the question I'm going to ask you is about the dissolution of NATO. And I'll propose to you that I think it is more likely that Israel, not Russia or China, is what makes NATO fall, and not militarily, but as an alliance. So the reason that I say this is because we're all united against Russia.
Is Israel in NATO?
No.
It's not.
And that's the thing. I'm pretty sure it's not. But you know what country is in NATO? Turkey. And what does Turkey have? Turkey has a lot of people. Actually, don't even get me started on that. There's a whole weird thing about Turkey. No, they have people that the Israeli government wants to have assassinated. And theoretically, the way this would unfold, if Israel is the result, is what causes the downfall of NATO, is that they attack Turkey, and the United States decides not to go to the defense of Turkey because a NATO country was attacked, Article 5 is invoked. If the United States just says, actually, no, we decide not to, we're allies with Israel as well, then they've broken their obligation. Who is then going to trust that the United States will back them up after that? No one is going to trust that if another potential ally, Saudi Arabia, who knows, and decides to do something, how do you know that the United States is going to be there to back you up? So if Turkey...
Can you put this question into context? Because we're talking about authoritarianism, fascism. Why are you asking this question? It's super interesting.
It's just an idea. It's just an idea that came to mind in between our last conversation, because the last conversation we had was about geopolitics, and we talked a little bit about NATO. And this was a question that was after seeing everything that the United States is willing to do to support them, if they're willing to support them in attacks on an ally like Qatar, which is technically an ally, kind of silly considering who they are and what they do, and they say they didn't know it was going to happen, but news came out that they did know it was going to happen and effectively gave the green light to have an ally attack another ally. What's to stop Israel from doing that to take out important targets or Muslim groups in Turkey? What's stopping them? It's not NATO, because the United States, in my opinion, is more likely to side with Israel.
100%.
And that could, in my opinion, lead to the dissolution of NATO, because then no one's going to trust the United States to defend them ever again.
Right. Well, that's the whole goal of Russia, right? Is to actually encroach, on Ukrainian territory, and then kind of get closer and closer to the NATO borders and kind of create tension there. It's interesting. Like, I assure you that the United States will not attack Israel. I suspect that if Israel were to assassinate targets in Turkey, it would be covered up.
They're not even covering things up anymore, though. They just do it out in the open now.
They do it out in the open, but not against NATO countries.
Fair enough.
Obviously, Israel is very aware of NATO and are very aware that the United States is the leader of NATO and their own closest ally. They wouldn't do anything to jeopardize that. I think that if they were to carry out hits on Turkish leaders, I don't know who these people are, that it would be very...
It's smaller targets,
or people in Turkey who are potentially, enemies of Israel. But that it would be done in such a way that it would not invoke Article 5. Like, there's no way that happens. So I'm not as worried about that. Like, obviously we're seeing this kind of trend towards isolationism, where the United States is less and less willing to play the role of kind of international police. We see, just to your point, with Qatar being an ally, Saudi Arabia being an ally, even when they conduct terrible human rights violations, right? And that's before mentioning Israel themselves, who are carrying out a genocide, and not only the United States,
the ultimate
but
human rights violation, one might
that's
say.
it. That's it. And we in Canada and many in the in Europe continue to support them as well. So it's not like it's just the United States who are participating in that. So yeah, I think that this idea of a united West is in decline. I think that fascist leaders are not as easy to work with and not as interested in working with other countries. And I think that Donald Trump, he was villainizing many of his, European colleagues and continues to do so, right, with the tariffs. And we see them responding. Look at the UK, right? He was just in the UK and they were rolling out the red carpet for King Trump. I saw a great, I don't know if you saw this, but when Trump went to the UK, there was a headline that said, "The ego has landed." So that was pretty funny.
It's not wrong. I saw a great meme, and it was Trump, and it was Trump trying to figure out where he knows Prince Andrew from. There was a picture of Trump, and he looked kind of confused.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. Anyway, so yeah, I think your Israel-Turkey question is an interesting one, but I don't see that happening. But yeah, I do think that as we trend more and more towards authoritarianism in the different forms that takes, in different countries. I do think that we will become less and less united in the West, and that will create more opportunities for adversaries like China, like Russia, like North Korea, like Iran, like Turkey. Turkey is such a weird, like Turkey's like India. Like, whose side are you on?
You're an ally. You're not. You're kind of a dickhead.
Yeah. What are you? What are you?
I mean, we're allies with Saudi Arabia, so I'm pretty disgusted by some of the people that we're friends with.
I agree, but Saudi Arabia is at least like, not also on the side of China and Russia, right?
Ooh, fun final question. Would you rather be in a democratic system that regularly has random human rights violations, or in a, say, monarchy where human rights are upheld to the best possible ability that the state has?
So funny you asked that, Kieran. That's the question that I try to answer in my novel. So you'll read that in the published thing.
I will. But what about the viewers? What do you think?
Kieran's reading a book right now.
Nick has a book that he is currently has worked on for many an hour. He has sent me a advanced
5 years,
copy,
baby.
And yeah, I'm gonna read it, and hopefully he makes a lot of money, so that I can get a signed copy and then sell that.
That's why artists do what they do for money.
Hey, everyone needs money to live, man.
That's why I got my day job. Anyway, I'm worried. Obviously, we didn't even talk about other factors like social media, AI, which I think are only going to further erode our sense of unity, togetherness, which is what makes democracy work, right? It's this feeling that we're all in it together, and I think that we're just being divided, right? More and more, we have leaders who are dividing us, but we also have companies that are dividing us, right? With these terrible algorithms on Facebook and Instagram that just feed us such polarizing content, where we stop seeing people who disagree with us as human, right? We just hate each other because we think that the other people are evil. Maybe we should spend more time talking about this on a future episode, but we are becoming more divided as a people, right? And that is something that I think authoritarian leaders are currently taking advantage of, and Trump is the best example of this. But I worry that if we don't do something drastic, that we are trending in a certain direction. And I ask myself, is there something that we can do to reverse that trend? And I'm not sure what the answer is, but it's a good question to reflect on.
The answer is good people need to stand up for what's right. Thanks for stopping by, folks.